Good day. It's not been widely reported, but over the last few weeks, there's been a significant ramp up of Russia's intervention in Syria. Now, I think in order to discuss this, it's perhaps worth again providing some context. Over the last few years, since Russia intervened militarily in Syria in 2015, the Syrian government and the Syrian military, backed by Russia, has regained control of roughly 70% of Syria's territory and nearly all of its major population centers. All the big cities, Damascus, Aleppo, Hama, Homs, and the rest are now securely under Syrian government control. However, the Syrian government it has still not regained control of an area in northwest Syria, Idlib province, which continues to be a sanctuary or refuge for anti-Assad militant fighters backed by Turkey. And more importantly, in the east of the country, there is a large belt of relatively unpopulated territory in Syria, which, however, is Syria's major grain and food producing and oil producing region, which is currently occupied by the United States. The United States also maintains an important military base at a place called Al-Tanf within Syria, and close to the Jordanian border. Now, the sanctions which were imposed on Syria by the United States last year, and which have been copied by similar European sanctions, have had the effect of essentially suffocating Syria's economy. It means that Syria cannot receive investment, outside investment, and that trade with Syria has now become extremely difficult. Foreign trade with Syria has become extremely difficult, and that has prevented Syria from buying oil and food internationally in order to make up for the oil and food it cannot produce in its eastern regions, because those are controlled by the United States. In addition, in order to enforce the sanctions, the United States has recently been taking action to block Iranian oil shipments to Syria by intercepting Iranian tankers. And there's also been rumors, and in fact they're more than rumors, they're essentially confirmed fact, that the Israelis, for their part, have carried out sabotage missions against some of these Iranian oil tankers and freighters, which have been sending food and oil from Iran to Syria. Iran, of course, being a close ally of Syria ever since the time of the Iran-Iraq war of the 1980s. So the effect of these sanctions has been to bring Syria's economy to a practical collapse, and, as I have said, to create an incipient humanitarian crisis in Syria. Now, this is in some ways rather similar to the events in Iraq in the 1990s. As many of my viewers will remember, following the first Gulf War, the United States and indeed the international community, since they were confirmed at that time by the UN Security Council, imposed all-encompassing sanctions on Iraq, which caused the Iraqi economy to practically collapse and caused immense hardship to Iraq's people. And there is no doubt that over time, these sanctions did sap the strength of Iraq's government and military, making it relatively easy for the United States to defeat that military when the United States invaded Iraq in 2003. So it looks as if someone in Washington and Brussels and elsewhere was looking to repeat the Iraqi experience in Syria by suffocating Syria economically in the same way that Iraq had been suffocated back in the 1990s. Only this time, it doesn't seem to be working, and the reason for that is Russia. This is something that has now been confirmed in an article that has been provided by the Arab news agency Al-Masdar. Now, Al-Masdar is based in Lebanon, but it is known to have very good sources within the Syrian government. Some people see al-Masdar as a Syrian government mouthpiece, and indeed it has been broadly sympathetic to the Syrian government throughout the long Syrian civil war. However, on balance, it is a reliable source, and on this occasion, this particular report that Al-Masdar has provided, I can confirm its essential truth from information I have obtained about what has been going on in Syria. This is what Al-Masdar says, and the report, by the way, dates from the 17th of April 2021. Private sources revealed to Sputnik Arabic, a Russian channel, about the establishment of an operations room. Operations room in this part of the world means a joint headquarters of Russia, Iran, and Syria, with the aim of securing a safe and stable flow of oil supplies, wheat, and some other minerals to Syria, materials to Syria, via the Mediterranean. The sources indicated that intensive meetings were held during the last period, which included representatives from Russia, Iran, and Syria, with the aim of breaking the stifling US-European blockade imposed on Syria. The sources indicated that the mission's work is to secure multi-sided coordination to secure the arrival of oil in the first place, especially after the fuel crisis that is the largest that Syria has witnessed in decades. The sources revealed that the approved mechanism provides for Russian warships to escort Iranian oil tankers coming to Syria as soon as they reach the Mediterranean gate of the Suez Canal and until they reach the Syrian territorial waters, in order to protect them from piracy or any targeting of a different nature. Regarding the mechanism of operation of ships carrying crude oil, the source said, the supply of oil will continue during the coming period through the collection of a number of Iranian ships and sending them to Syria in a single batch, provided that the Russian naval fleet in the Mediterranean will take over the safety of all their access to the Syrian ports continually until the end of the year. The publication said that a number of ships will arrive in succession to Syria with foodstuffs and some primary commodities that enter the pharmaceutical industries in particular, preferring not to specify their source in order not to be targeted on the high seas. Simultaneously, Russian ships will continue to transport large quantities of wheat to Syria in the context of contracts signed in earlier times and which are currently being implemented, and it is expected that Russian wheat supplies will continue until the end of June, which means that Syria is now securing its needs for flour until mid-2022. The successive arrival of wheat supplies to Syria indicates that the beginning of dismantling of the deep bread crisis that Syria has been experiencing for several months. So, what this is saying is that there's now been an agreement that Iran will continue to supply oil to Syria, meeting Syria's oil needs. This is as part of an agreement that was entered into between Iran and Syria during the Iran-Iraq war, when Syria backed Iran during that war, and in return, Iran entered into a long-term agreement to supply oil to Syria. But that the Russian Navy will escort the Iranian tankers which ship the oil to Syria, those tankers moving in convoy so that they can be better protected by the Russian fleet. And that apparently has been happening, and we learn from the al-Masdar report that several Iranian oil tankers have indeed already arrived in Syria, mitigating the fuel crisis that is underway there. And then we also learn that separately from the shipment of oil by Iran, Russian merchant ships have been supplying flour and grain to Syria directly from Russia, and that this has eased the food crisis in Syria. Now, the latter I can actually confirm. I've had reports from people in Syria that the food crisis there is abating, and that the price of food is falling, and that the price of bread in particular is falling. And I would add that a viewer from the United States who is of Syrian extraction actually contacted the Duran during one of our live streams and confirmed live that he has been informed by his family and friends in Syria that the food crisis in Syria is indeed abating as a result of these Russian supplies. So it looks as if Russia has acted decisively to break the American and European economic siege of Syria. Syria is now getting its food, and it's now getting its oil, thanks to food supplies from Russia and oil supplies from Iran, which are being protected by the Russian fleet. In addition, we also learn that Syria is receiving other materials from an unnamed country, some primary commodities that enter the pharmaceutical industries in particular. Now, I'm going to make a guess that these are medications to deal with the pandemic, which has been very severe in Syria. And though the al-Masdar article says that they prefer not to specify the source in order that these shipments not be targeted on the high seas, it is overwhelmingly likely that these are coming from Russia also, though it's conceivable that China may be playing a role too, but it's most likely it is Russia. So there we are. This attempt to suffocate Syria has failed, and once again, the situation in Syria is improving economically, and is doing so, moreover, in advance of presidential elections, which are due in Syria on the 26th of May, and which are overwhelmingly likely to return President Assad to power. The Russians have acted to ease the economic blockade, in fact, to break the economic blockade on Syria in advance of those elections, and they have succeeded. And the Russians have done something else, which is that they've been taking military action. And here we have learnt about the Russian Air Force being very active over central Syria, where ISIS in particular has attempted to reassemble, and also of the Russians bombing various jihadi installations across Syria, and including ones that apparently are not operated by ISIS, but are operated by other militant anti-Assad groups. And perhaps the most interesting of all is a report that appeared on Monday of this week by the Russian Defense Ministry, which claimed that a major militant installation somewhere in the general region of Palmyra had been destroyed by the Russian Air Force, killing up to 200 militant fighters. This is what the report says. After confirming data through multiple channels on the location of militant facilities, Russian aerospace forces carried out airstrikes. 2 hideouts were destroyed, up to 200 militants, 24 pickup trucks with large caliber machine guns, as well as about 500 kilograms of ammunition and components for creating improvised explosive devices were also destroyed. The statement then goes on to say that the target was a camouflaged base where militant groups had organized attacks in Syria and manufactured explosives, and it says that they were specifically planning terrorist attacks and attacks on government agencies in large cities in order to destabilize the situation in the country ahead of the presidential elections on May 26th. So, a very tough Russian military action in Syria, and perhaps the most interesting aspect of this is that there are now reports, not confirmed by the Russian Defense Ministry, but which have been circulating in the Russian media and on the internet, that this particular large militant base, which the Russian aerospace forces, the Russian Air Force says it has destroyed, was actually located in an area within the region where the United States has its base at al-Tanf. In fact, this particular militant base appears to have been the closest the Russians have ever come to launching an attack on a facility near the US base at al-Tanf. So, what are we to conclude from all of this? I think the big story here is not about the fact that the Syrian situation is changing. I think that is a given. Obviously, the Russians are acting to stabilize the Syrian government, to make the situation in Syria better in advance of the elections on 26th May. But I think the big story here is once again that the US's prized sanctions weapon no longer works anymore as it once did. The Russians have shown, and they've shown since 2015, that they are prepared to, and that they're willing to act decisively to protect a government that they want to protect through military means. But this is the first instance that I know of where the Russians, backed no doubt by China, and no doubt also in concert with Iran, have acted to negate the effect of sanctions on a country imposed by the United States. Obviously, those sanctions have a long-term objective. They're partly intended to prevent the development of Syria's economy. But undoubtedly, their primary purpose was to create an immediate and overwhelming crisis in the Syrian economy, which they presumably hoped would either destabilize the Syrian government or force it to engage in negotiations, which would in time lead to the removal of President Assad. Well, the Russians have shown that tried and tested strategy used by the United States in all sorts of places around the world no longer works anymore. The Russians have worked with the Iranians to provide oil to Syria, and they provided food to Syria themselves. Someone, in addition, is providing medications to Syria, almost certainly to deal with the pandemic there. My guess is that that's Russia, but the fact that that's not being admitted may suggest that it's a third country, in which case, conceivably, it could be China. Who knows? Regardless of that, this is another instance where we can see that the United States finds itself in a situation where the tools that it used in the immediate post-Cold War period during the so-called unipolar moment no longer work anymore as they once did. The primary challenge obviously comes from China. It is China, for example, that has just signed that massive deal with Iran, which will, in effect, negate the effect of US sanctions on Iran. But it is Russia, in this instance, which has acted immediately to prevent the US sanctions weapon being used effectively against Syria also, preventing the United States from repeating in Syria what it had done previously in the 1990s to Iraq. And it has gone further than this, because if that strike on that militant base in Syria really did target a militant base that was close to the US base at al-Tanf, then that was also a strong signal by Russia to the US also. It is intended, I think, to tell the US that the Russians are not going to allow militant activity to take place anywhere in Syria, even in places not far from where the United States itself is located. I expect, by the way, that if there is a Biden-Putin summit anytime soon, that the Russians will be pressing the US hard for the same sort of withdrawal from Syria that we have seen the US recently announced that it will undertake in Afghanistan. One way or the other, the world is changing. The United States needs to understand and accept that the unipolar moment is passing. It is no longer in a position to dictate events and to control events around the world in places like the Middle East, in places like Syria specifically, in this case, in the way that it once could in the 1990s, when its power was unchallenged and overwhelmingly dominant. Thank you for joining me for this program on this channel. Please check us out. Please check out our other programs which we do in our other channels. The Duran, where I do programs with my colleague and friend Alex Christoforou. Please also check out Alex's channel. You will find links to all these channels under this video. Please also check us out on our other platforms, BitChute, Library, Rumble, and especially Odyssey. And please also support us via Patreon, Subscribestar, and PayPal. And remember, we accept donations and payments in all currencies, including the new electronic currencies, which have recently been appearing. Please also join us on our Discord server and also check out our shop. Buy yourself the fabulous things that you will find there, our amazing magic mugs, our hats, our hoodies, our sweatshirts, our t-shirts, and all the rest. And thank you for joining me for this program, and I look forward to you joining me in future programs on this channel. Please remember to check your subscription, and have a wonderful day until we speak again. Thank you.